Before we dive in, I want your input. What kind of horror story should I cover next? The stranger and more obscure the theme, the better. Haunted vending machines? Creepy fast food encounters? Urban exploration gone wrong? Please drop your suggestions below and I will throw them together in another viewer suggestions video. Don't worry if yours doesn't get picked, as it might become a video theme in its own right. Thank you in advance for your creepy suggestions. Now, let's get into tonight's dark collection. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Here's the bells. This incident happened around 1 or 2 years ago. I live in a single-parent household with my mother, who always returned home late at night due to her job. Until she came back, I'd usually spend my time studying for exams. Around midnight, when my mother finished work, she would call me on my cell phone. "I'm on my way home. Do you need anything from the convenience store?" That was a typical conversation. That night I responded, "No, I'm fine," and I ended the call. However, a few minutes later, I remembered we were out of some daily essentials, so I called her back from my call history. The phone rang several times, but there was no answer. Maybe she's driving. Oh well. Just as I was about to give up, the call suddenly connected. "Hey, Mom." But there was only the sound of labored, heavy breathing. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I repeated. That strange, labored breathing was the only reply I got. No other sounds, no background noise indicating that she was still in the car or driving, only the slow, rhythmic breathing from the other end, although not initially frightening. The unexplained nature of the sound left me deeply unsettled, and I quickly hung up. Did I call the wrong number? But no, I dialed back from the call history, and it had clearly shown my mother's number. Had she accidentally answered the phone? Could the receiver have been pressed near her face that closely? Even so, wouldn't I still have heard the sound of her car? Could it have been some crossed line, like when truckers' radios occasionally came through the speakers of my PC? But can such interference occur with cell phones? I struggled to rationalize what I heard. At the time, although uneasy, I convinced myself it was just some kind of interference. To reassure myself, I tried calling again, this time directly from the contact list. But there was no answer. Well, I guess that she's probably still driving, I thought. Reluctantly returning to my desk as I resumed studying, another, more alarming possibility entered my anxious brain. Oh my God, what if she was in an accident? What if she had managed to press the call button, but was unable to speak because she was injured or incapacitated? A terrifying thought surged through me. My mother's commute involved passing through a lonely mountain route, isolated and rarely traveled. My anxiety spiked, and panic began to grip my chest. Should I call the police? An ambulance? Should I go look for her myself on my scooter? My head and stomach twisted painfully with fear and my own indecision. At that exact moment, I heard the familiar sound of my mother's car approaching the driveway. Oh, thank goodness. Of course, she's fine. I felt a weight lift from my tight chest as I heard the car door open and close. Clunk, clunk, twice. I paused, puzzled. Normally my mother only opened and closed her door once, and she hadn't stopped to go to the shop tonight. so there shouldn't have been any extra baggage. Feeling oddly curious, but mostly relieved, I went to greet her at the entrance. "Tadaima, I'm home," my mother announced cheerfully. "Hey," I responded gruffly, typical teenager in the midst of adolescence. I noticed she carried only her usual handbag. When we moved into the living room, I mentioned that I'd tried to call her back earlier. She said she hadn't noticed because she had been driving. As I opened my mouth to ask about the strange call, she spoke first. "Oh, you'll like this. You know that river, the one from the incident where 4 people were murdered recently?" At the time, there had been a gruesome incident in the neighboring town where a family of 4 had been brutally killed, their bodies submerged in the river. Well, I drove past there tonight, exactly where they found the bodies. Suddenly, my car, the Prius, started giving a warning message saying, "Please fasten your seatbelt on the passenger side," except no one was sitting there. I thought I'd tell you because I know how much you like these kinds of stories, right? A cold chill crawled down my spine. I mean, I did like scary stories, but I really didn't like that one. All the strange incidents of that evening suddenly fell horrifyingly into place. Looking back, I can rationalize it as a sensor malfunction. Right, but at that very moment, it could have been anything. It bothered me so much that I wasn't able to get back to studying. With growing dread, I asked my mother one last question. "When you got home tonight, you opened and closed your car door twice. Why was that?" She stared at me puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I only opened it and closed it once." Oh man, for someone like me, with absolutely no sensitivity to the paranormal, this remains the one genuinely terrifying experience of my entire life. This story isn't just scary. It's deeply mysterious and profoundly tragic. Even today, it haunts my thoughts with unanswered questions. About 7 years ago, around 10 o'clock at night, I was walking home from cram school with a friend when we both heard a loud crash behind us. Turning around, we saw the aftermath of a traffic accident involving a motorcycle and a car. Although we didn't witness the collision itself, the sound, the sickening crunch of metal, made our hearts jump into our throats. From what we could gather afterward, it seemed the motorcycle had attempted to turn onto a narrow side street just as the car was passing straight through the intersection, causing them to collide violently. We immediately rushed over to help, well, as much as 2 high school students could, along with the driver from the car and several neighbors who'd come outside after hearing the noise. The motorcyclist lay motionless on the asphalt, thrown several feet from his bike. "Hey, are you okay?" the car driver asked frantically, clearly shaken by what had happened. Then unexpectedly, the motorcyclist stirred and rose swiftly to his feet. Removing his helmet, he looked around blankly for a moment before calmly reassuring everyone, "I'm fine. There's nothing wrong." He appeared entirely uninjured and even began walking away, leaving his damaged motorcycle lying in the road. The car driver desperately tried to stop him, saying, Wait, we need to call the police and an ambulance, just to be sure." But the motorcyclist dismissed the concern with a gentle smile, saying casually, "It's all right, my house is just over there. I'll go get my parents, I'll come back." With those words, he disappeared down the dark, narrow alley, quickly swallowed up by the night. Confused and still shaken, my friend and I eventually continued home. Though something felt deeply unsettling about the encounter, it just felt like it was over way too quickly, you know? About 3 months later, my friend and I were hanging out at a convenience store near that accident spot when a middle-aged man approached us hesitantly. "Hey, are you kids local kids?" he asked. His eyes looked tired and filled with sadness. "Yeah, we are." We responded cautiously. Of course, at our age, we were constantly reminded to be wary of strangers. "Oh, you see, a few months ago, my son had an accident here. He hasn't come home since, and I've been desperately looking for him," the man said, pulling out a photograph. My heart stopped. The young man in the picture was unmistakably the motorcyclist we'd seen that night. I was certain of it. Confused, I said gently, "But your son walked away. After the accident, he said he was going home to get you and your wife." The man shook his head slowly, his expression a mixture of sorrow and confusion. "Yeah, I've heard that from others around here too, but you see, our home is very far away, in another prefecture. You'd have to take a plane to get there." His voice trailed off, heavy with the weight of loss and unanswered questions. He looked at us earnestly, desperately hoping for some clue we might provide, eyeing us up and down, offering a pause, a gap of silence that we might fill. We couldn't, though. "Are you absolutely sure this was my son?" he asked. "Yes, sir," we replied. I recognized every feature, the hairstyle, the face, the calm yet confused demeanor. We definitely remembered him. "I see," he murmured. "Well, if you remember anything else, could you please let me know?" With that, the man handed us a flyer and walked away, shoulders slumped, carrying with him the painful mystery of his son's disappearance. Even today, I can't help but wonder what truly happened that night. Had the young man suffered some invisible injury, wandering confused into the darkness, never to be found again? Or had something far stranger and more tragic occurred, leaving his family forever lost in uncertainty and grief? Whatever the truth, it remains hidden in the shadows of that narrow road he walked down. And those same shadows will haunt my memories forever. This happened not long after I started working full-time. Back then I was new to the industry, wide-eyed, eager to prove myself, willing to put in the long hours that came with the job. I'd landed a position at a small design office in the city. Our workspace was located on the 8th floor of a rather old building, the kind with yellowed wallpaper in the hallways, buzzing lights and elevators that creaked like old bones when they moved. The entire 8th floor had been converted into office space, and our company had the whole thing to itself. To enter, you took the elevator up, stepped into a small landing area, and then opened a frosted glass door that led into the office. My desk sat all the way at the back, straight ahead from the entrance, facing a blank wall. And on nights like the one I'm about to tell you about, I was completely alone. Now, the building itself had a reputation. It stood in a district that had once been known as an execution ground, more specifically, a kubikiriba, a place where people were beheaded. It was the kind of history people whispered about after a few drinks. Most laughed it off, but in our industry, where late nights were commonplace, a lot of people had stories, whispered of strange sights and sounds, shadowy figures glimpsed through glass, drafts of cold air in rooms with no windows. At first, I didn't pay it much attention. Old buildings creak, elevators break down. You hear things when you're overtired, right? At least that's what I told myself. That night, I'd stayed late again. It wasn't that unusual. In this line of work, 2 a.m. was just another hour on the clock. The office was silent, the kind of silence that only exists in old, empty buildings. The only light came from the glow of my monitor. I had my music playing softly through my earphones, but even that started to feel a little too loud. I was chipping away at a design draft, eyes half closed, when I heard it. A metallic sound, faint but distant, behind me. Clank, clank. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but it came again. Clank, clank. I turned around slowly and looked towards the entrance. Through the frosted glass door, I could make out movement. The elevator doors were opening and closing, over and over. Mechanical, unnatural. Clank, 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 clank. The sound echoed through the hallway outside, bouncing off the walls like footsteps. There was no reason for anyone to be up here this late. Why would someone come up to our floor at this hour? The elevator doors continued to clank rhythmically. I watched the shape of the elevator doors through the frosted glass, opening and closing like they were trying to breathe. In, out, in, out. Eventually I stood up. I wasn't even sure why. Just instinct, maybe. Something took hold of me. I walked to the entrance, hand hovering over the door handle, and then silence. The moment I stepped out of the office, the elevator door stopped. The doors slid shut, slowly, softly, and remained closed. I stepped into the hallway. My heart was thudding, and I walked over to the panel. I pressed the open button. The elevator responded immediately. The doors opened, revealing an empty cabin. Nothing inside. No bags, no documents, no coat caught in the frame. Just the cold air of a steel box that felt like it had been waiting for something or someone. I stared into that empty space for a long time, unsure of what I was looking at. But then, eventually, I turned back. I returned to my desk and sat down, and I resumed working. But the silence around me felt heavier now, like something had followed me back in. The longer I worked there, the more stories I began to hear. Co-workers who'd worked late, talking about footsteps in the hallway, the elevator coming up on its own. Some even claimed that they had had dreams, always the same, of a man in dark silhouette standing just behind the frosted glass, watching them silently. Some said that they felt cold air near the doors. Others said that they heard knocking. I'd laugh, back then, joke about it, like anybody else. But after that night, I started noticing it too. How the shadows seemed longer after midnight. How the lights sometimes flickered near the elevator. How even when I was sure I was alone, I didn't feel alone. Looking back, I wonder if I should have taken that night more seriously. The elevator shouldn't have been moving. And if it was just a glitch, why did it stop the moment I stepped out into that hallway? Why did it feel like something was trying to get in? I still don't know what I heard that night. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was a visitor. From another time. From the execution grounds down below. Still wandering the halls, looking for a way out. This happened during my high school days, when I used to commute by train every morning. The line I took passed through rural parts of the Tohoku region, and my usual route included a small, worn-out station tucked deep in the countryside, a place where time felt slower. One morning, as usual, I met up with a close friend and we waited together for the train that would carry us to school. When it arrived, we moved to board. Something terrible happened. Just as she stepped forward, her foot slipped right into the narrow gap between the platform and the train. Now, normally the gap wasn't wide enough to be truly dangerous. Most people wouldn't even think twice about it. But she had slipped just at the wrong angle, and her thigh caught the platform's edge, stopping her from falling all the way through. The station master and the surrounding commuters reacted quickly. The train was halted before departure. With combined effort, we managed to pull her out. She was shaken but conscious, and her leg bloodied from the sharp scrape of metal and concrete. She was visibly injured. She sat there trembling on the platform. I knelt beside her to check her leg, trying to comfort her. That's when I saw it. Now, from my low position, my eyes naturally dropped towards the gap she had fallen. At first I noticed the glint of fresh blood dripping from her calf. But then something else caught my attention. Something was wrapped around her ankle. I squinted, leaning in, my breath catching in my throat, because to me it looked like a hand, but not just any hand. It was impossibly small, like a doll's hand, thin, pale, but not the porcelain of a toy. It was flesh, wrinkled, aged, and unmistakably real. The fingers attached were long, too long, and they clung tightly to her ankle in a way that sent icy panic running through my veins. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move, and then right before my eyes the hand released her, and it slipped back into the shadow of the gap like a serpent retreating into a den. Gone, just like that. She hadn't seen it. She kept insisting that her foot had simply slipped. She hadn't noticed anything grab her, and when I asked, too casually, trying to mask the shaking in my voice, if she felt anything strange, she looked at me blankly. I didn't press the issue. At the time we were too focused on getting her medical help. But after she was taken away by ambulance, and I was left standing alone on the platform, I finally allowed myself to think, really think, about what I had seen. It wasn't a ghost. Nah, I'm not the type to believe in those. I've never seen or felt anything paranormal before or since. This was something else. This was something alive. Something that lives in the gaps. I couldn't shake the realism of it. The detailed skin, the tight grip, the deliberate way it had vanished once I'd noticed it. It wasn't some hazy flicker of light. It had form, mass, intent. Later I'd heard rumors from locals about that station. They say back in post-war years, a child had slipped and fallen between the train and platform. No one had noticed until it was too late. Her body was found crushed and lifeless, her tiny hands stretched upwards from the darkness. Some say that that station was cursed from that day. Others whisper of a being that hides in the narrow cracks of the world, in platform gaps, in wall crevices, beneath tatami mats, something small, persistent, hungry. I don't know what I saw. I only know that since that day, I never stand too close to the edge, and when I board a train, I always glance down first, just in case it's reaching. This is a local incident from the neighboring town, but there was a public phone in front of a certain station that was scheduled for removal. But the phone inside had already been swiftly collected by the telephone company, leaving only the empty booth behind. The booth remained in that state for a while, eventually becoming a playground for children concerned about safety, Authorities sealed the booth off. They enclosed it with a metal chain-link fence, one of those pop-up ones you can get. It made it impossible for anyone to enter, basically. About half a year passed like this. One night when someone arrived at the station, they noticed about 4 or 5 people gathered around the booth, loudly discussing something. Curious, they approached the scene and discovered a blonde foreign man inside the booth. Despite it being completely sealed, he was yelling frantically, demanding someone call the police. I say a foreign man because he was clearly not a Japanese native, and it wasn't clear what nationality he was from first glance. Almost immediately after, the police arrived alongside 2 suspicious-looking vehicles, a black painted sports car and a pure white Mercedes-Benz, likely belonging to the Public Security Bureau. The foreign man was quickly whisked away in the Mercedes without any fuss. Later, when the police investigated his nationality, they discovered that the country he claimed to be from did not exist. 2 days later, after the incident, the phone booth was finally removed. Strangely enough, on the stand where the phone once rested, several green walnut shells were reportedly found, the outer husk of unripe walnuts. I learned later that these shells are linked to magical properties and folk beliefs in some cultures. Hi, Jay here. This creepy story reminded me of the baffling urban legend involving a mysterious traveler from Taured. The tale goes back to a hot day in July 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Officials became perplexed when a traveler presented a passport from Taured. He attempted to enter Japan, and his passport seemed legitimate, covered in authentic-looking stamps, and the traveler himself insisted adamantly that Taured was a real European nation, though it couldn't be found on any map. Airport security, bewildered and concerned about potential fraud or espionage, detained him in a guarded hotel room overnight while they conducted further checks. Strangely enough, by morning the traveler had inexplicably vanished without a trace. Despite the room being continuously monitored and secured, all his belongings, including his passport from Taured, had vanished as mysteriously as their owner. No explanation was found for this man's sudden appearance and disappearance, and the incident remains an enigmatic footnote in the annals of unsolved mysteries. Could it be that, like the man from Taured, the foreigner in the sealed-off phone booth slipped through some invisible crack in worlds, or perhaps these strange incidents suggest reality is not quite as firm and reliable as we'd like to believe? What if there are countless unknown doors scattered throughout our seemingly ordinary surroundings, just waiting to open unexpectedly? It's something to think about for sure. This is a real, frightening incident, shared as a true experience by someone who worked at a crematorium. A friend who's personally witnessed thousands of cremations and skeletal remains explained to me something chilling. It's apparently unmistakably clear when someone revives during a cremation. Normally the body assumes a boxing-like posture, the muscles contract under intense heat. However, on one occasion, when there was an emergency stoppage mid-cremation, he saw something deeply disturbing. Unlike the typical curled boxer-like stance, this particular corpse had moved significantly within the cremation chamber. The skull was shockingly positioned directly beneath the chimney vent, far from where it had been initially, and close to the heat-insulated door, an impossible movement under normal conditions. The body seemed to have desperately moved, clawing and struggling in an attempt to escape the unbearable heat. I know this has been mentioned before. Maybe you might know it as an urban legend, but it still terrifies me. Above all else, imagining the horror of waking up in one's own cremation. It's enough to freeze the blood. Speaking of cremations, another eerie story involves the cleaning of cremation chimneys, usually outsourced to specialized contractors. One day, a worker from one such cleaning company descended into the chimney from above for routine maintenance. He heard screaming, shouts for help. A piercing, blood-curdling scream echoed up from the chimney, causing panic among the workers on the ground. Moments later, the cleaner scrambled out of the chimney, eyes wide with terror, trembling uncontrollably. After calming down slightly, the terrified worker finally described what he had encountered. As soon as he illuminated the chimney walls with his flashlight, he saw something horrific. The chimney walls were entirely covered with countless desperate handprints and deep, frantic scratches, as if someone or many people had clawed and struggled violently, trapped within the suffocating darkness. Stories of prematurely buried individuals coming back to life have circulated persistently since Edgar Allan Poe penned his chilling The Premature Burial. For those unfamiliar, this story graphically details the terror and paranoia surrounding accidental burials, recounting a man's obsessive fear of waking to find himself trapped underground, struggling futilely against the suffocating darkness of a coffin. Poe's story vividly conveys the ultimate human dread, being sealed alive in one's grave, helplessly awaiting a horrifying and lonely death. Although modern medical and forensic technology should theoretically prevent such nightmares today, there still remains unsettling whispers of incidents in past eras, particularly in Japan's age of traditional burials. One particularly haunting story tells of a faint sound of an infant crying, emanating from a cemetery. Despite thorough searches, no baby could be seen. Listening carefully, villagers traced the cries to beneath the ground itself, directly from within a grave. Panicked, they fetched the temple priest and hastily excavated the grave. Upon opening the coffin, a large traditional wooden bucket sealed with a lid, they found something unspeakable. Inside lay a woman who had died pregnant, and horrifyingly, it seemed she had given birth after burial. The infant's faint cries echoing hopelessly through the cold earth. Such stories raise the most disturbing questions. How many times might these horrors have actually happened? Could they have been more than urban legends? And how certain can we ever be that such nightmarish mistakes no longer happen again today? Silently concealed within crematorium furnaces and darkened graves. This is the only strange and unsettling experience my older sister, who's never even had the slightest hint of spiritual sensitivity, has ever had. To this day it sticks in her mind, a quiet mystery that turned deeply disturbing the more we thought about it. It happened during her university years, when she had a close friend named Wakana. Wakana had moved to Tokyo from a rural area to attend school and was living alone in a modest apartment complex. Her unit was flanked by two neighbors, one on the right, a woman of similar age, and on the left, a man in his 30s, who kept mostly to himself. One afternoon, Wakana was rearranging her furniture when she heard a distant kong kong, a sharp knock coming from the wall on the left. She froze, listening. At first, she was confused, thinking maybe it had just been her imagination or some random noise. But it happened again, and again. Over time, she noticed a pattern. The knocking would always follow loud noises she made. Dropping something, shifting furniture, laughing too loud on the phone. It gradually became clear that the man next door was knocking to tell her, indirectly, to be quiet. Coming from a countryside home with large plots and generous space between houses, Wakana had never grown up needing to worry about making too much noise. Her family lived a relaxed life where nobody cared about footsteps or voices carrying through thin walls, but now she understood. This was city life, and paper-thin walls didn't forgive carelessness, and a man in his 30s, possibly stressed or sensitive, could become a real problem if pushed too far. So Wakana adjusted. She tried to be quieter, more careful, and while the neighbor never verbally complained, the occasional knock served as a polite, if slightly unfriendly, reminder. By the time my sister came to visit, Wakana had grown quite used to living on her own. It had become routine. The city no longer felt as overwhelming. That night my sister stayed over in Wakana's apartment. As university girls tend to do, they chatted late into the night, whispering secrets, laughing, and letting their conversation run wild, well past midnight. In the middle of a burst of laughter, they heard it. Kong, kong. 2 sharp knocks on the wall, the left wall. Immediately, Wakana went pale. She glanced at the wall and mouthed an apology before turning to my sister and whispering, "That's the neighbor. We were too loud." My sister, understanding the situation, apologized aloud with Wakana, and they both lowered their voices. After that, there were no more knocks, and eventually, they drifted off to sleep. A little uneasy, but it was whatever. At least it seemed normal then. The following week at university, Wakana's expression had changed. She looked tired, distant. My sister asked her what was wrong. Wakana replied in a quiet, shaken voice, "The guy next door, the one on the left. Did you know he took his own life?" Shocked, my sister sat in silence as Wakana continued. "He jumped from a rooftop, not far from the apartment complex. It happened the same night you stayed over." That detail chilled my sister to the bone. She replayed the events in her head. The jokes, the laughter, the kong kong. But if that man had left his apartment earlier that evening, who or what knocked on the wall? It wasn't even considered a stigmatized property because he hadn't died in that apartment. There was no official record of tragedy within the building itself, but that didn't matter to Wakana. Weeks later, she packed up and moved out. It was too much. She told my sister it was because she kept expecting to hear the knocking sound again from a room she knew was now empty. My sister told me the story in a surprisingly casual tone. "I guess those things really do happen sometimes, huh?" She said it with a shrug. I could tell even years later that a part of her still felt the chill of that night. Maybe Wakana had some latent sensitivity, something that let her brush shoulders with things just beyond our sight. Or maybe some echoes are too strong to fade, some gestures too habitual to stop. Somewhere in Tokyo, perhaps in a building no longer marked by tragedy, an empty room might still offer its quiet, polite kong kong, waiting for someone to answer. This happened about 5 years ago, during a family trip from our hometown in Hiroshima to the Kyushu region, where we planned on visiting both Kumamoto and Oita. At the time I was traveling with my wife and our 2 young children. One was 4 years old and the other was just 2. It was our first long trip with the kids, and though we were nervous, we felt they were finally old enough to handle the travel. We kicked things off in Beppu, Oita. Known for its steaming hot springs and tranquil, misty atmosphere, we stayed in a luxurious ryokan that night, soaking in the baths and savoring a feast of fresh seafood. The cost was steep, but the memories felt worth it. The next day we headed west into Kumamoto Prefecture, trying to keep the remaining trip budget-friendly. After exploring the city's central shopping areas and enjoying the local sights, we checked into a modest business hotel. Though it was in the heart of the city, the area felt a lot quieter than Hiroshima's bustling downtown. After dark, the streets were nearly silent. No raucous bar noise, no honking cars. It was strangely peaceful. This place might be a hidden gem, my wife said, and I agreed. The room was simple, a double bed with a TV, which had access to both local and satellite stations. To my delight, there was a J-League soccer game on, which kept me entertained as the kids wound down. We weren't expecting much, but it turned out to be a surprisingly comfortable stay. Or so we thought. Exhausted from the day's walking, we all showered and turned in before 10 p.m. That night I fell into a deep, heavy sleep. Sometime after midnight, I stirred awake. The air felt dry and my throat ached. I reached for a bottle of jasmine tea that I'd left beside my bed, and as I lifted it, I paused. There was a sound outside the door. Footsteps. The hotel door wasn't thick. A sliver of light from the hallway bled through the gap at the bottom. From somewhere far down the corridor, I could hear that steady tap, tap, tap of footsteps slowly drawing closer. It wasn't the random clatter of someone in a hurry or a pair of tipsy guests. These steps were slow, deliberate, rhythmic even, echoing faintly in the dead silence of the hallway. What unsettled me more was how clearly I heard them, each step crisp and sharp despite plush, carpeted floors. And though I can't explain why, I convinced myself they belonged to a young woman. I could almost imagine the light, precise patter of her shoes, maybe heels. The footsteps kept coming, closer and closer. My heart began to race. I prayed the walker would simply pass by, because I felt so strange about it. But they didn't. The footsteps reached our room and stopped, right outside our door. I lay frozen, clutching the tea bottle to my chest, ears straining. Seconds passed, then minutes. Nothing. No movement. No departure. Just presence. Something, someone, was there. I stared at the door, the weak light from the hallway flickering slightly beneath it. I was too scared to breathe. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually, whether from fear or sheer exhaustion, I blacked out. When I woke up again, dim, early morning light was creeping through the curtains. It was just after 5 a.m. My body was still tense, but I told myself it had all been a dream. That's when I saw something. In the corner of my vision, near the base of the hotel room door, inside the room were two pale feet. Thin, white, female. They didn't move. I tried to scream, but I could only gasp. I didn't dare look up to see what or who they belonged to. I slammed my eyes shut. Then came a sudden pounding of footsteps, thud, 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 rushing across the room towards where my children lay sleeping beside my wife. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move. I was wrapped in the blanket, gripped by an overwhelming sense of dread. Again, consciousness faded. The next time I woke, sunlight was streaming in, and my wife was already up, doing her makeup by the mirror. Her calm demeanor clashed harshly with the terror that was still gripping me. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nope. Slept through the night. Why?" I slowly rose and checked the door. No sign of the feet obviously. I opened it. The hallway was empty, bright and perfectly ordinary. I told her everything, the footsteps, the feet, the rush of sound. She brushed it off as a bad dream, but I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. Something was in that room, and to this day I wonder, who was that woman? Was she tied to the hotel? Had she died there? Or returned to it for some reason we can't understand? All I know is that in the quiet heart of a city, in an ordinary business hotel, I experienced the most vivid, paralyzing fear of my life. And no matter how hard I try to explain it, I still wonder if I had opened my eyes that morning, what else I might have seen.